Hello, philosophers. Today's episode comes with a story. It's 2001. I was just a kid and I was watching The Late Show with David Letterman. For years, I had loved watching stand-up comics on Letterman, on Conan, on HBO, on Comedy Central. At the end of the last show of that year, 2001, Letterman introduced this stand-up comic who went on to just destroy the audience. He got applause breaks. He got the laughs when he needed them. I had never heard of him when I was watching that set, but I was just blown away at what he was able to do. In those days before social media, YouTube and DVR, before all that, there was no way to see something like that again if you wanted to. So I went online and I wanted to see if there was some way to get a recording of that set that I had watched, if there's a way through CBS or the show itself. I had no idea what I was doing. But after a few attempts online, someone on a comedy discussion board posted, "Hey, Tom, this guy is trying to get a hold of your Letterman spot." The next thing I know, that comic actually responded to me and we started emailing. That comedian's name is Tom Ryan. And to my surprise, Tom was kind and generous enough to send me a VHS copy of his comedy demo reel, and that included the Letterman spot that I saw. I saw him perform again on Letterman about a year later, and he and I were in touch as late as 2004 or so. But through moves and life changes and changes of emails, we eventually lost touch. But through Twitter a couple years ago, after a decade and a half, I remembered how kind and generous he was to me. And I wanted to reach out and just say hi and thank you for being so kind to this young kid who was such a fan of a really tight comedy set on Letterman. So this summer, I finally met Tom in person after 23 years, and I met him in the coolest way. Tom and I met up at the legendary Comedy Cellar in New York City, and we saw Colin Quinn perform, who was amazing. And after that, Tom and I got to catch up on life and comedy, what we've been up to over the years, over a couple very good pizza slices there in New York City. For me, it was just such a pinch me bucket list experience. I couldn't be more grateful for Tom's kindness and what turned out to be this unexpected friendship. If you're ever in New York City, you've got to see him perform. So Tom is my guest today, and he takes you through what it was like to prepare and perform on Letterman. We talk shop about comedy writing, comedy performing. We talk about what the comedy community is like and so much more. So enjoy this episode with my friend and comedian, Tom Ryan. Tom Ryan, welcome.
Hey, Jared, how are you?
I'm
Good to
great.
see
I'm
you.
great. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for coming on. I wanted to start just with one of my favorite stories. It's around 2001, and I think it is 2001, and you are backstage at the Ed Sullivan Theater, and you're about to perform stand-up on The Late Show with David Letterman for the first time. And it's sort of at the height of Letterman's popularity, as far as I can remember.
I
And
think so,
so
yeah.
can you give us a sense of what was going through your mind at that point? What was the preparation like? And what was that whole experience like from, hearing the show to actually performing your stand up to whatever the aftermath was?
It, it it's probably the highlight of my career and the highlight of my life. Needless to say, that first one, I did two of them. And let's see, here's what happened. My manager, I had just moved to Los Angeles from Florida. And I think just the act of moving from Florida to Los Angeles sends a statement that, okay, this guy's serious about comedy. There is a bias toward like, where do these people live? If you're in New York or LA, people know you're taking this very seriously. And I had done some cable TV by then, and I was 15 years into comedy at that point. And I knew I had 5 minutes that should be on TV, because I'm watching enough late night spots to know this bit about Morton salt and Arm & Hammer baking soda is right for late night TV. So there's a comedian who everybody knew from the road, and he is the warm up guy for the Letterman show. And he's also a road comic that we all know, Eddie Brill. That's a name it might ring a bell. So my manager, Colleen McGarr, she sends Eddie my 5-minute tape. Now, that same bit had gotten turned down by the Conan show. They said, "You're not right for our show. You're just not right stylistically." I later ran into the guy who booked that show. I said, "You know what? You were right. You're absolutely right. I'm not right for that. It's just a vibe thing, whatever." And so Eddie likes to see people live and do auditions for comics that he's thinking about putting on the show. So I'm supposed to go on at the Improv in LA in 2001 on September 12th of 2001. Eddie was flying in on September 11th. Obviously, all those plans get canceled, right? So a few months go by. He had already seen my tape. He kind of knew he was going to put me on, but he wanted to come out and do an official audition for a bunch of comedians at the Improv. So I'm there ready to go on. And I remember this detail. And I'm nervous beyond belief. I wanted to do well and all that. But I knew Sarah Silverman a little bit through my friend Todd Berry. I'm name dropping now.
Like it.
And Sarah said to me, she goes, "I was talking to Eddie. He's pretty sure he's going to put you on the show." So that made me feel better and relieved. I go, all right, my odds are really good. But he has to green light it, see it in person. But that relaxed me. And I went on, and I knew this material inside and out, upside and down. Went on, couldn't have gone better. Now, I can't remember if he told me that night. I'm pretty sure it was that night. He said, "Okay, you're on." And I just, I couldn't believe it. I kind of knew it was going to happen, but when you hear that, I couldn't believe it. And at that moment, I'm thrilled, but the nerves start churning. And it almost to the point of like, what have I done here? What kind of a corner have I painted myself into? I have to go on national TV, and I've always battled with stage fright. I've always had nerves issues on stage. People say, "Oh, you look so calm up there." Not true. I have a lot of anxiety pre-show and all that. So for the months leading up to it, I'm just going over it. And it depended on a few opening lines, and you have to get the precision of an opening line correct. And there was one opening line I was very comfortable with. Oh, hi, how are you? Nice to be, whatever it is, nice to be here. I was on my computer today, and I got one of those junk emails telling me I could make a whole lot of money. It said, "People just like you are making hundreds of thousands of dollars in their spare time." You know what? If I was making $100,000 in my spare time, I would go full time. Now, that always got a good laugh. It's an opening joke that works. Eddie starts to say that the setup to that joke is too wordy. So for about a week, going back and forth, leading up to the show, we're arguing back and forth. Eddie, my manager, and myself, and I'm saying, "Eddie, that line is my security blanket. I can't change the wording on that. I need to be," and he relented. So then I got booked. I forget what the date was, and then it got moved. They're always juggling the schedule, but as it turned out, he says, "You're going to be on December 20th. You're going to tape December 20th, the second taping. They always tape 2 shows on Thursday nights so that Dave could get a 3-day weekend. And so you will air on Friday night, December 21st, 2021, which was the final show of the year. So I was the final guest on the show for the year 2001. So I about a week in advance, I get, I'm shopping around for a suit, and it's getting closer, but my mind is just churning for months leading up to it. And in an exciting way and a nerve-wracking way. And people go, oh, that material works, don't worry. And I said, I know the material works. I'm worried about having a complete freeze-like breakdown in the moment, unable to speak kind of a thing. It's not about, does the material work? I know the material works, that particular material. One thing Eddie Brill said to me leading up to it, he said, here's the deal. Tonight when you tape, there are comedy audiences all around America. You've performed for these audiences all around America. He goes, the best audience in America tonight is the studio audience that you'll be performing in front of. He's absolutely right. And it was. And once you think of it in those terms, you go, oh, yeah, they're going to be great. They want you to do well. So I fly into New York a week in advance, practice the set. Eddie would come out and watch me. He goes, okay, you're right on time. It's 4 minutes and 40 seconds. So you time it out. I mean, it gets that meticulous. And I'm coming in right on cue at about 4:40. And, okay, ready to go. And I said, he also offered me, he goes, if you want to come in a day early to watch a taping from backstage, feel free. And I said, of course. Kind of demystify the experience, So I go in and I watched the show that taped that night, and you just are aware this is going to happen. So then night of, afternoon of, I go in for the second taping, probably about 5:30, 6 o'clock. Dressing room, I have my Hugo Boss suit that I had purchased in LA. I mean, the most money I ever dropped on a suit in my life. I got my tie picked, everything. And so it's second taping, and I'm just pacing, and I'm kind of a wreck, really nervous, but it's going to happen. And then I went into the green room. I was able to have 10 guests, 5 in the audience, 5 in the green room. So my two managers, Colleen and Duncan, and then my parents, a couple of my sisters, a niece, and a brother, I think my brother, his wife, I forget whoever it was. And I'm really nervous. And then I come down and I'm ready to go. They came and got me, and I go into the green room. And one of the strangest experiences was I see my sister Mary sitting in the green room talking to Biff Henderson, and they're eating chocolate chip cookies. And that put my mind at ease. So I remember this moment when I go, Biff says, okay, he's got his headset on. He goes, okay, right this way. Now the nerves are really starting to go. I can feel it right now as I'm retelling the story. And I walk to the side of the stage, and I see David Letterman sitting there at his desk. And it was like suddenly, oh, now I hadn't seen him the night before because I just stayed back and watched monitors backstage. I didn't see him in person. So this is the first time I've ever seen, and this was the thought that went through my head. Wow, he's a fellow comedian, and he just happens to be way more successful than I am, but he's a fellow comic. And I suddenly saw him as just a guy. who's just sitting there between break, and he's just kind of, looking around, and one of the production managers, whatever the title would be, is talking to him, and he's just, relaxed. And then suddenly it's like, all right, the commercial break's going to be over in 30 seconds, and you just start revving up. And when I hear him start to introduce me, then they nudge you to give you the exact moment of when to go out. And they had already run through in rehearsal that there's your mark, an X piece of tape, which is right out of the movies practically. And Eddie said, play a little bit to the cameras, but just play to the audience. And I did. And again, it was like an out-of-body experience, like when you gave the first speech you give in high school, when you know how public speaking can be nerve-wracking. When we first do it, it was like that with tons more adrenaline going. And it was out-of-body. And that first line, boom, got a big laugh. And I go, this is great. Off and running. And then the focus kicked in, and just don't mess it up. And I made a mistake. I stepped on a line. It was going so well that I thought, oh no, these laughs are going to make it go past the 440 mark, right? So I start rushing a little bit, and this one line gets a big laugh. And instead of waiting, I go right into my next line while they're still laughing. And I still watch that and I go, ooh, I missed, minor mistake, but I still would love to relive that moment. It goes so well, couldn't have gone better. And then he comes out, shakes my hand, and then we walk over to the couch. And they always tell you, Dave probably won't talk to you. He's just busy. And then we'll probably come back and he's going to say, good night, everybody. Instead, what happens is Dave starts talking to me. He goes, hey, Tom, that was just tremendous. Where are you from? And I said, well, originally Philadelphia. And I said, and it's really cool. My parents are in the audience, and my brothers and sisters are here, and this is a really thrilled to be here. He goes, oh, well, you did great. And I said, and my parents are, he's probably thinking I'm going to say my parents are big fans of yours, but my parents, they watch the news every night with Peter Jennings on ABC News. And that was the other guest that night, was Peter Jennings, So he goes, oh, tremendous. So they came on a good night. I go, this is wild. And then I think it was Eddie Brill came over to me. He goes, hey, we've decided that we still have time left on the show, and Dave wants to ask you a few questions, which you also prepared in advance. But they say, don't worry, that rarely happens. And next thing you know, camera's back on, and it's back. And by now, I'm totally relaxed. So he asked me a few questions. I answer them. They got laughs, and it ended with him laughing. Good night, everybody. And it was the coolest. So that's how that went down. And it's hard to believe that was 22 and a half, 23 years ago. Yeah. 22 and a half years ago.
I mean, just hearing, you don't often get to hear someone explain from start to finish what that experience is like. And for me, little did you know, that was sort of the moment that our friendship started.
Yes.
Because I was, you mentioned that was probably a Friday. I guess that aired on a Friday.
It was aired on a Friday night.
Mm-hmm. And I was apparently watching, and I won't tell the whole story. I told that in the intro, but I was just blown away. I was going, well, this was just one of the tightest sets that I've seen.
Ah, thanks.
I didn't record it. And so, like, how do I see more of this comedy? So back then, I was just a kid, and I was trying to look up your information on the internet. And so that's how I ended up contacting you. But I want to ask also, so maybe one question is sort of what came out of that. Are there some good things that happened as a result of that? But also, I'll start with that.
Yeah, I got a call. the Morton Salt Company contacted my manager and sent me a bunch of swag of Morton Salt because I talked about Morton Salt in that first set. And that was one cool thing. Then I got a call from a somebody that contacted my manager, guy in the movie business who is huge now. He said he loved your set and he wants to know if you have any movie ideas. They'd love to. And I had a few premises for movies, and I met with the brother of that guy, and they said, okay, well, if you can write a treatment or a screenplay for this movie, we'll take a look at it. And this is when I realized writing screenplays is a completely different skill set than writing stand-up. And I realized I'm not wired for that kind of writing. I found that out. And I really tried. I put effort in. And to this day, it's one of the biggest regrets that I have. When I look back on that, I go, there was a window there. There was a door that opened for me there that I didn't take full advantage of. But the other part of me was so thrilled that I'd finally done national TV. And I thought, this is what I've been working 15 years toward. And people said, oh, you should go get a writing job. No, this will get me more stand-up work, which it did. It gives you more credibility with the clubs. I was getting plenty of work, but I by that time I was trying to get into I was starting to play around with the corporate gig circuit. So that tape helped in that regard. That they, you now have credibility. Okay, he's done the Letterman show, so they'll watch your. And back then, I used to mail out VHS tapes to speakers bureaus and corporate bookers and things like that, and clubs. I'm still trying to get in with the bigger name clubs around the country and all that. So, in that regard, what comes out of it is a stamp of approval with the club scene, and it just opens doors that you're not even aware are opening. In LA, I think it helped me get in with a few of the other clubs. I was already in at the Improv, and so that's kind of the kind of things, it gave me a little more confidence in my career, put it that way. That's what came out of it. Then about a month after that, Eddie told me, this was kind of very thrilling. He told me that he said, we're in a meeting one day, a staff meeting, and out of the blue, Dave says to me, he goes, Eddie, remember, you know that guy that did the baking soda bit? He goes, make sure we have him back on. So, wow, I was thrilled. So I was back on by August of 2022. So about 8 months later, I was back on. And then, not 2022, 2002. I keep saying,
right.
I keep mixing up 2001 ago. And 2021, right. But so August of 2002. And then I think the next one was scheduled for 2004. That one kept getting bumped back. And then it eventually, I said, well, we changed our booking policies and we're using a different approach to. So I was in studio one night waiting to do my third, standing in the wings waiting to go on. And the guest was the New York Times columnist, Maureen Dowd. She was the guest. And her and Dave just got going and going. And they went long, and they said, we've run out of time. And he jokingly said to the studio audience, he goes, Tom Ryan was going to be on tonight, but this conversation went long. He's already gone back to the hotel. And there was somebody who actually called me or wrote to me or whatever it was, or saw me at a club, did you really leave the show and go back to, oh, come on. It was a joke. But anyway, they said, but we'll have him back. And then through a series of it just never happened. The third booking never happened. And I always told people it always bothered me because I did two appearances, 5 minutes each roughly. So I got my 10 minutes of fame, but not my 15 minutes of fame. And then it dissipated. I was fine once that bothered me a little bit. But then I thought, I did it twice. That's pretty cool. To have gotten invited back was a thrill. It validated again that the first one went that well.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so I want to touch on the writing that you mentioned. I actually would love to hear about the difference in writing stand up and writing a script. And also the connections to philosophy. There's so many things I want to talk about, but maybe we can go back a little bit in. So at that point, you had these bits that were established that you had been doing for years. Can you give us a sense of who you were opening for? I guess maybe even to go back a little bit further, like how you got into comedy in the first place. But then once you were established, who were you opening for? And I should mention, I know enough about you to ask, what sort of comics were you opening for? And then there were also some other venues that you played that were maybe outside the comedy venue. But how do you think about that looking back?
So I was working in Philadelphia back in 1986, and a friend of mine had gotten a job with a golf course designer in Florida. And I was into golf at the time, and he said, "Would you like to come down here and work with us?" He said, "You'll be working at one of their country clubs that they designed, and they now own it. They want to start getting into the ownership of country clubs." I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." And they were going to make me a manager which I knew nothing about, but they wanted a guy with a finance background in there. And within a month, I quit my job, moved down to Florida. Within a month, they said, "Well, we got bad news. We're actually selling the club, and your job is going to disappear. And sorry, here's a $500 severance pay, and you know, oh, okay." So I decided to stay in Florida. That was in Fort Pierce. I moved down to West Palm. I'm looking around for a job. I see a little blurb in the paper about a paragraph long. It said, "New comedy club opening in West Palm Beach, Florida." And my heart started beating, and I said, I need to get a job there, whether it's as a waiter or a bartender, barback. And I got my resume printed out. I put on my suit and I went over there. I said, "I'd love to interview for that job." And the woman looked at me. She goes, why do you want, or no, I said, "Do you have any jobs?" They said, I called them, "Do you have any jobs?" They go, "No, we don't have any jobs. We're all booked up." And I'm usually not persistent. And I said, "Are you sure you don't have any openings there?" I remember saying that. She goes, "Well, we do have opening for a doorman, but it only pays $4 an hour." And I said, "Can I come in and interview for that?" And I walk in with my suit and my resume. She goes, "What are you?" I go, "Well, I'm a big comedy fan, and this would be a fun part-time job." "Oh, okay." And I got hired opening night. Turned out the club was owned by a big rock promoter, John Stoll, Phantasma Productions in Florida. So he opened a comedy club because he knew comedy was booming at that time. So I was a doorman, and he had a big organization going booking concerts. So he went right into it and started booking big name acts. So there I am working the door, and suddenly these people I've seen on TV are coming through. John Mendoza, who had done the Letterman show, and I had seen him on, and I'm now talking to that guy and driving him back to his hotel and asking him, "What was it like? I saw you on the Letterman show." And, I'm interacting with people that I've seen on TV. Then he really upped the game and he started bringing in uh, Dennis Miller, Jerry Seinfeld, and you name it, they came through. David Brenner, a childhood hero of mine. And, and
Can I back up for a second?
sure.
Because I want to ask. So the reason that you wanted to get involved in this particular stand up club that was opening was that you had been just a fan of comedy? And then, I mean,
It,
what made you think, okay,
yeah,
you
good
know, the
question.
path was you wanted to get on stage and, you know, you're going to sort of do this incrementally, I guess. And
Yeah,
so I'm wondering, and by the way, like Letterman at that point, that show was late night. It wasn't the
late
late
night,
show, right? And so you, I mean, you
relatively
were a
new.
particular comedy fan.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. What had happened was in late 1985, before, no, I believe it was right after I moved to Florida. I said, I'm now away from Philadelphia. I always had, in the back of my head, I always had this idea. I would love to try stand up comedy someday. And I remember when I was working in insurance, I heard a guy talk about this thing that he attended, and he went to an open mic night. I had never heard of open mic night. I had no idea what. I go, yeah, anybody can go on and do 3 to 5 minutes, and that's how you get started. I'm like, oh, that's how it happens. So that planted a little bit of a seed. So I started keeping a notebook in late 1985. So the idea of possibly trying this stand up thing started to bubble up. So that's when I saw that ad in the paper by early 1986. I go, oh, this will get me in the environment. Now I'm so glad I got that doorman job, because here's how I would have approached my first open mic. I would have done it. It wouldn't have gone well. My first one, I got some laughs, but it didn't go great. And I would have thought, well, I tried. Luckily, working the door, I'm now talking to professional comics. And I remember one of them, I don't remember who it was. He goes, oh, you can't even judge yourself until you've done about 25 open mics. I go, what? He goes, yeah, you bomb in the early times. Oh, okay. Again, that was information that, had I not had that information, I might have gone on once and then never tried it again. And I'll bet there's a lot of people out there that could have done very well in comedy, that maybe that's exactly what they did. Um, so anyway, the comedy club where I started working did not yet have an open mic night, so I drove down to Miami and went on in '86 after I was already doing the doorman job, and I did 5 minutes at a club called the Comedy Woom, WOOM, Miami Beach. And then I used to drive down on Tuesdays to that club and do open mics. And then I found out that the comic strip in Fort Lauderdale had Monday night open mics. That was the first few open mics I did, for the first few months. And I used to drive down there with a guy named Dan Whitney, who later changed his name to Larry the Cable Guy. So I started open mics with him. And so did open mics for about 2 years, but then started to get a few paid gigs here and there. I remember making $20 one time, and I said that's a milestone. I'm technically now a professional comedian because I made money doing stand up with my ideas. And I think like the third paid gig was I was booked by a guy who was the feature act at the Comedy Corner one week, and he liked my stuff. I must have been the MC by then. And he goes, "Hey, I'm doing a gig for my brother's camp counselors, summer camp counselors getaway or end of year celebration that you had a great year, whatever it was." And that was his younger brother. But that was the guy who booked me on that for $50, highest I had ever made at that point, was none other than Jeff Garlin, who later co-created Curb Your Enthusiasm. And I knew Jeff back from his Florida days, and you know, and I ran into him recently and reminded him of that, and he remembered it, and he headlined that gig obviously, and I opened for him, so that was fun, and those were very exciting days because you I ended up then taking a day job, a menial day job, so I could make some money, still work the door at night, and I did my open mics. But in those first few years, when you're trying to get to the point where you have a half hour of material together that you can maybe suddenly begin to make a living at this thing, you eat, sleep, and breathe it 7 days a week. Study, listen to albums over and over and over again, and try to crack the code on how do they do what they do. Because I just started with some stray ideas in a notebook, and then, my method to this day is the same. I jot things down. Where do these thoughts come from? You interact. You just stray, walking down the street, going to a shoe store. Um, and the one thing I've been very good at over the 38 years that I've been doing this is I've been very diligent about capturing my premises, my ideas, my stray thoughts, and I jot them down, and they all go into one big database. I have a Word file. Yeah, it used to be notebooks, and then now it's a Word file that's over 1,000 pages long that I could spend the rest of my life going through, sifting. And so it took me 2 years of doing open mics before I was starting to get enough work on the side, and a booker from Atlanta, Chris DePetta, who has done very well over the years. He's a big time producer of sitcoms and all by now. He's Billy Gardell's manager from Mike and Molly, and he manages Billy Gardell, and he's managed many other people. But Chris DePetta was then booking comedy clubs, and he liked the stuff that he saw me do, and he said, I'm going to use you on my clubs that I book on the road. He goes, I'll call you Monday, get out your calendar. And he proceeded to book me for a bunch of weeks. And I went in to my day job and I said, hey, I got to quit. I'm a full-time comic now. And I bought a brand new car, put a down payment. I go, I'm going out on the road now. And that's what I did from like 88, from basically 1988 through the year 2000, lived in Florida and just drove around the eastern part of the country doing gigs, doing, comedy clubs. And that was the process.
Back in those days, when you were so diligent in your writing process and your actual work, what comes to my mind is I've heard Seinfeld talk about that so often. And you mentioned you saw him back in the day, and I do want to see what the connection is there. But is that something where other comics were giving you advice, or did it just come natural to you where you just were going, look, if I'm going to make it, I have to put as much work into this as possible and really start refining the writing process in some way?
Yeah, it's funny. I kicked myself for over the years at my work ethic is weak in one sense. It on the surface it appears that like I don't set enough time aside per day to go over my notes and this. Here's what, and I realized, well, I have a different method than a lot of other people have. And there's a great book. I'll go off on a tangent. There's a tremendous book that was written by Franklin Ajay. Franklin was a comic. They called him the jazz comedian. Real cool guy. Really funny. Very innovative. Very different. Used to do a lot of Tonight shows with Johnny Carson. And he moved to Australia about 25 years ago, and he lives over there and does comedy over there. Franklin Ajay, very well connected. He was in the movie, he was in a big movie, Used Cars or Car Wash or one of those movies. I forget what movie he's been in. But anyway, he wrote a book called Comic Insights, and he interviewed about 20 really high-profile comedians. I think he had Richard Lewis, George Carlin, a bunch of others. He was well connected. all that book talked about was the different methods of how they came up with material. And I noticed parallels between myself and some of the others, and then differences between my method and some of the others. My method over the years has been capture the idea, jot it down, and then tinker. Tinker with it on stage. That's the best process I can describe. Is it's an ongoing process of tinkering, and and I try to use open mics now. There's a club around the corner from where I live in Astoria here in New York. I'm out in Queens. There's a club called QED, and they have these open mic nights. It's all comics, and I'm twice as old as most of them now. But what I liken it to is they hang around and they'll watch you. They have no idea who I am. I have no idea who they are. But I'll go up and I'll try a brand new, you get 3 minutes, depending on how many comics show up and how many people are on that open mic. You get 3 minutes, and I go up with something brand new out of my notes that I've never tried before. And when you just hear yourself say it out loud, the seed gets planted. You now tried that little thing that was in your notes. Now you've put it out in public. You gave birth to it. And I did it about a year ago at QED. I went up and I talked about recycling. And I forget what I did on that particular show, but it worked. It got one or two laughs. And then I worked the comic strip on the Upper East Side a lot. I've been adding and adding and adding to it. I tape every show and I listen to it. And now it's like a 2.5 minute bit that's really working well right now, you know? And I don't even think I've done it in about 2 months, so I can't even remember how it goes, but I'll listen to the tape. But if I was on stage right now and I had to do my recycling bit, it would flow out of me because you're in that. But if I had to do it for you right now on this podcast, I would go, I can't even remember. Like right now, I can't remember how the bit goes. Isn't that weird?
I can completely understand that because the context is so different. There are
Yeah,
no sort of like environmental cues
yeah,
that are
that's
familiar
it.
where you can
Uh-huh.
just go, okay, I know exactly. This all sounds familiar.
Yeah,
Um, but
strange.
maybe a bit that so for any bit that you can think of, I mean, what comes to my mind are the classic, the Morton Salt bit, the Arm and Hammer baking soda bit, even the oil light in the car
Yeah, right.
bit, the rotary foam bit. Um,
Yeah,
how long had you been so those are the bits that I will link to those
sure.
Letterman appearances in the show notes, so I
Yeah.
encourage everybody to watch them. But um, how long did it take you to tinker? Can you give an example of like word choices and wordsmithing that you had to
Yes.
do where you're taking it from that very beginning idea and then
Yeah.
refining it with, I don't know, word order, word choices, and then the delivery
I,
matters? What is that like?
isn't it weird because the you do sometimes the wording pops out on stage, and it's the importance of taping. Now that we have these phones, now if I got the wording right on a certain bit, I would go home and write it down on my notebook. Before I was recording, it was bulky. You have a tape recorder. Now you have the phones. I would realize, oh, that's the wording on that. That's how that should be worded. When I moved from Pennsylvania down to Florida in 1985, I gathered up, I got rid of all my furniture, but I gathered up enough of my belongings. And I remember packing kitchen supplies. I noticed there was a drum of Morton salt. And I put that into my box and I said, I think this Morton salt is now the same drum of Morton salt I had 3 moves ago. And I had started a notebook by then. I hadn't yet started the notebook, but probably right when I got to Florida is when I started that notebook. Or maybe I started in Pennsylvania, I'm not sure. But I remember, and I still have it in my notes somewhere, I've had the same drum of Morton Salt for 5 years or for 3 moves. So that was an idea that was, and I think it was a while before I stumbled upon that in my notes and tried it out on stage. I should have tried it my first time ever on stage, but I didn't. But it connected with the audience. I go, how long does it take you folks to go through one of those big blue drums of Morton Salt? 5 years? And what'd you pay for it? A quarter? So that was the pause. What'd you pay for it? Quarter?
Good. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. I was going to ask about that. And also, so when you originally wrote it down, did you, because Big Blue Drum has a sort of cadence to it.
Big blue drum. You're right.
Right.
There is a
Was
rhythm
that
there.
from the beginning, or did you have to sort of even, I mean, I'm trying to get at like the little
Yeah,
flourishes
the
there that
minutia
you
of
included.
how it
Yeah.
comes to be is that there is a rhythm is important, and and I might have said first time, how long does it take you guys to go through a drum of Morton Salt? Maybe 3 times later, just in the moment, how long does it take you folks to go through one of those big blue drums? Big blue drums of Morton Salt. Pause. 5 years? That gets a laugh. Then another pause. What'd you pay for it? Quarter? Now, the first time it might have been, how long does it take you folks to go through a drum of Morton Salt? 5 years? I know I paid only a quarter for mine. That's not as good.
Right.
So you stumble upon it, then it starts to, through repetition and just doing it over and over again, the rhythm and the wording get tighter, more economic, and it just starts to come together. There was I had the Morton Salt bit, and I had the baking soda bit that I had started working on too. And a comic in Florida named Todd Vidham, he said, those two bits are so related. Why don't you just put those together? And I go, oh, of course they are. So now a 1 minute on Morton Salt and 1 minute on baking soda becomes a 2 minute bit. Now it's really starting to hum. Then a guy named Richard Jenny, may he rest in peace, Richard Jenny, one of the greats. I was working with him in Tampa. He goes, there's a lot more in there on those Morton Salt Arm & Hammer bits. Keep working on those. They were early at that point. Yeah, he said, okay. So I really, by putting a ton of time into one bit, you learn how how the process works. You start learning the importance of wording, the importance of a pause here, the importance of dropping a word here. There was a bit that I was doing about Wendy's, going into a Wendy's and feeling embarrassed that I had to order their products by using their names, and they insist, can I have a French fries? They're the Biggie fries. And I say, I'm in public. I'm an adult. I'm not going to say Biggie fries out loud. People are behind me in line, and they're going, come on, say it, will you? Right? Now, that's the wording I had for about a year. Come on, say it, will you? But having been going through this process over the years and picking up little tips from comics, one of which was trim the fat, use less words rather than more words. That thought, when I was doing the Wendy's bit, occurred to me. And I must have had the thought in the instant, this joke doesn't need the will ya part. So for about a year, I was doing the bit, and the people behind me in line are yelling at me, come on, say it, will ya? Always got a good laugh. One night I go, drop the will ya part. And I go, come on, say it. Doubled the laugh. That was an amazing lesson in the rhythm of it, the importance of wording, and on and on. I mean, it's endlessly fascinating, endlessly frustrating, because I have a million bits that are half baked and sitting in the garage, not ready for to be trotted out. There's one I've been working on off and on this year that I think it's funny. It was in my notes about 15 years ago. I think I thought of it. And I started trying it this year. I go, why have I never tried this one? You know, I was scrolling through my notes. That's my method. Scroll through your old notes. Oh, there's one I never tried. Why not? Well, I must have been busy trying other new stuff and didn't have time. Whatever. But it's the when you bake chocolate chip cookies, they put the recipe right on the back of the bag of morsels. So you buy the morsels and it says 2 cups flour, 2 cups sugar, whatever the recipe, and 1 cup Nestle's Toll House genuine chocolate chip morsels. How insecure are they that they have to spell out the brand name? What are they thinking that you're going to buy the what do they think we're thinking this is, a recipe bag? Wait a minute. Well, where am I going to get Nestle's Toll House morsels? I wonder if they're inside this recipe. Yeah, there they are. Are they worried I'm going to read the directions and then go back to the supermarket and buy generic morsels? Like, they're cramming in marketing. So I've been playing around with that one, and it has yet to really connect. But again, I could spend another 6 months really working on that one. And I should be better at sitting down. Something I'll do once in a blue moon, I'll go to the library and really try to take those fragmented notes and try to really write it all out. And when I do that, it's super productive. And I kick myself for not doing it more often, But for now, my method is jot it down. On your way to the club, read your little, set list sheet. Always keep it in my wallet, new ideas, kind of looks like that. Whatever, throw those into the wallet on the subway on the way to the club. You're just going, all right, what am I going to try tonight? And sometimes the additional punchlines occur to you while you're walking from the subway to the club. And that happens all the time. So that's my method. And then by now, all those little rules that I don't even realize I know, they're just embedded in the hard drive, and they I've noticed later part of my career, I just go up with the premise, and most of the writing and the wording, it just pops out on stage. So it just happens naturally. That's my later years method. I used to be much more sit down, write it out, memorize, try it this way. It's become a little more organic now, I would say.
One of the reasons I asked that question, I think I've heard it was Dana Carvey on his Fly on the Wall podcast with David Spade. They often bring up process for
Mm.
comics and comedians. And he talks about the musicality of
Yeah.
comedy quite a bit. And I've heard Seinfeld, I think it is, talk about even just counting syllables,
Wow.
sort of in the same vein. But so I listen to a few comedy podcasts pretty regularly, and I'm
Cool.
always interested in that because there are so many different parallels with wordsmithing for the sake of laughs and the delivery that needs to happen in a comic environment, stand-up environment, and wordsmithing when you're doing writing, like I do, philosophical writing,
Yeah.
and the delivery that happens when you're teaching. So I think there's a lot of crossover there, and things that
Yeah.
that at least I've learned about my discipline from paying attention to stand-ups. One of the one of the observations that I've had is this doesn't go for every bit or even every comic, but one of the trends, let's say, or even themes in some stand up is just looking at something, looking at the world from a unique perspective, noticing things that other people haven't noticed. It's right in front of their face.
Yeah,
And is that, am I wrong that that's sort of a theme? Like, how do it, we're sort of zooming out here on the process, but how important is it for a bit to look at things from some sort of unique perspective, to notice something new?
yeah. It's funny. I think you just kind of, that's innate to, I think, I think most comedians, and I think most people, everybody has a sense of humor. And a sense of humor is you're struck differently by something than most other people are struck by, or a something jumped out at you that didn't jump out at other people. And I think the process is capturing those stray little thoughts. The noticing that, wow, well, that Morton salt, that's the same one I had when I was living in my last place. Huh. And the realization to write that down, or obviously the one you mentioned that I did do on Letterman was, and to this day, comics tell me about this joke. They go, "Man, I love that joke. It was sitting there for all of us, and you got to it," and that's the greatest compliment. And I have since heard other people do variations of that joke where I think maybe parallel development, maybe they heard somebody tell them my joke and then they forgot. That happens. But I got to it. I got it on TV first, so I'll take. That's all that counts. But again, I'm driving down the highway, and my oil light came on. Now I've seen that my whole life, the oil light, and I thought, why does it? So the joke is, my little oil light came on, and that little symbol looks nothing like an oil can. When it first came on, I thought, well, apparently my car's low on gravy. Now, and then I add some more lines. If I remember correctly, the first time I tried that joke, it got nothing. But I think the second time was when I added, you needed some additional setup. And that little symbol looks nothing like an oil can. You know, First time I tried it, I might have gone, my oil light came on. And I thought, oh, I'm low on gravy. That doesn't work. It might work, but it didn't the first time. So back to the drawing board, try to figure out the wording. I, at the time, used the word apparently. That is now a very overly used word in comedy, but at the time it wasn't. So apparently, so many comics use that word, but at the time, um, I have now stripped that word away when I do that joke. I still do that joke on occasion. I haven't done it in probably a year, but I'll still dust it off and do it. But I dropped the apparently because it seems it's become a cliche comedy word, which is fine. I'm overthinking. that, but it is. It is
Yeah,
weird.
no, that's super interesting. I had not thought about specific words being overused in a comedy setting
Yeah,
by era.
yeah. So I'm thinking. And there are others that I can't even think of. A friend of mine reminded me of. He said what I like in the baking soda bit. I talk about how that company convinced us to take a box of baking soda and pour it down the drain. That's what they've convinced us to do to help keep the drain smelling clean and fresh. Buy it, pour it down the drain. And the line, I don't know when I came up with it, but while I was working on the bit, and took me it took me years to realize where I get this word from. But I say no other American company had that kind of nerve. And in a sense, the word nerve is a punch word. It's a great word, nerve. And I realized my mom used to use that word a lot. That took a lot of nerve. So that line was up in my head. But then I also realized years later was that I might have also gotten it from the Bob Dylan song. You got a lot of nerve to say you are my friend on Positively 4th Street. And the way he says the word nerve, I might have been influenced by that, but the that word does some heavy lifting in that bit, and it's weird that way, how one word can make or break a joke or a line within a longer routine, which in a sense they're a series of jokes on the same topic. The one of the other things Richard Jenny told me one time was because I like to stay on the same topic for a while. The beauty of that is once you get the topic up and running, every line can potentially get a laugh. You don't have to create a new picture for the audience. They're with you for 2.5 minutes while he's talking about the big blue drum and Morton Salt now. I already got it up, and now every line is bang, 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 because I've thought sometimes that when comedy's really, really going well, the laughter is coming from the fact that the audience members are reading each other's minds, that you're creating the exact same visual in their mind, and they're laughing at the fact that, hey, we're all laughing at the visual that's in our head right now. And that's kind of a magical thing. It's almost we've become a group and we're reading each other's minds. And you're up there, if you're really doing your job, when it's really in sync, that's kind of what you're doing. And that's maybe what laughter is. I don't know. Nobody knows, right? You've been trying to figure that out. Philosophers have been trying to figure that out. But we don't know what it is.
No, it's fascinating to me, and you're right. There's such a unifying element there because it's also most of the time involuntary as well. I mean, you're right to notice like everybody's sort of doing the same thing at the same time,
Yeah.
and their psychology is probably very similar as well. There's just this created space that again
Yeah.
is sort of unifying, no matter how small or large the crowd is. And it's
Yeah.
hard to think of another venue or environment that does that in the same way.
It is. Yeah. Music, obviously, when a concert is really going, and let's say at a Bruce Springsteen when he's doing Born to Run, you got 18,000 people hanging on every note, all in that moment of just exhilaration, when it's really crushing. And but laughter's a different beast. It's very strange, and it's an odd thing. Yeah, very odd.
Yeah. So you've speaking of that sort of unifying element of comedy, you've mentioned a few different people so far, and I'm interested to hear about the comedy community
Yeah,
and what that's like because as I watch the comedy documentaries and see comics interact and listen to them on podcasts, etc., sometimes it's mentioned explicitly that hey, I remember I think it's Larry David and Seinfeld, not to keep bringing those names up, but
yeah,
they often talk about I'm most comfortable if there's a comedian in the room. I could be at a party if there's one comedian in the room, you're going to go and talk to that
yeah.
person, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on why that is. I have my own ideas, and they've explicitly stated that. But can you give some sort of explanation of that community and maybe
Yeah,
a couple examples of talking with
sure,
other comics that really bring that
sure.
home?
A a couple I've always told this story. Two stories come to mind. I One of my comedic heroes was George Carlin, and I got to go to one of his shows out in Las Vegas, and he knew I was a fellow comedian, so he got me a ticket. I was working the comedy club. He was working the big theater at the Riviera, 1993. And he said, oh, and when you, believe it or not, we exchanged phone messages through the hotel phone system. I actually called the front desk, and they put me through to George Carlin's room, you know? And he did his show. It was great. And he said he had left a message on my hotel room. And he goes, oh, and after the show, come on by and say hello after the show. So I walk back. There's a security guard there with a clipboard. And he goes, Tom Ryan? Yep, right this way. I'm the only one doing the meet and greet after the show. I walk into the green room. There's George Carlin. And, hey, how you doing? And immediately I tell him I'm a huge fan. You're probably the reason I got into comedy as a kid. I go, I know you hear that a lot. He goes, well, you know what? I never get tired of hearing that. And I appreciate you saying that. And I said to him, I go, you know, I said, oh, that show was great. He goes, well, you know, I'm having a little bit of trouble with these two bits. Right away, we're talking shop, because only comics know how tedious this thing can be. And I go, wow, it never ends. Basically is what he's saying. I said, but you're doing stuff now that I think is as good as or better as when you were huge in the 70s. And he said, I appreciate you saying that. He goes, I think I'm doing better work now that I'm in my 50s. I think he was probably 53 at the time. I'm doing better work now than when I was 20 years ago, hippy-dippy weatherman and all that. I go, yeah, this stuff's amazing. And we're just talking bits. And, I talked to him for 10 minutes, but it was an instant connection. We could talk in a shorthand that he knew that I would know what he meant by going, I can't get the middle part of that bit to work, right? And I said, I love that bit you do about the environment, Earth plus plastic. He did a whole long thing about maybe we were created by planet Earth to produce plastic. Maybe and then they're going to get rid of us. I said, that whole bit was so good. And it was on the end of your last HBO special. I said, I caught the second half of it. He goes, oh, you got to see the whole thing. He goes, give me your address. I'll send you a copy of that tape. And he did when I got home. I said, you're a very busy guy. He goes, I'm very organized. I'll get it to you, and it was, and it showed up in my mailbox. And another example, I recently went to, this is the last great gathering of comics that I went to. My good friend Todd Berry, Todd. Todd is tremendous act. I know him from my early days in Florida. I saw Todd his second time on stage, and Todd and I are very good friends to this day. And about maybe 2 years ago, and we're always hang out in New York, and I have I play in a Monday night pool league at Amsterdam Billiards, a great place. They have a pool league, and I play on Monday nights. And sometimes Todd will he'll text me. He goes, "Hey, are you around after the show? Let's go get a slice of pizza or have a drink, whatever." So one night he's at this bar in a hotel down at right near where near my pool room, and I text him and go, "Hey, my match is over. Where are you?" He goes, "Oh, I'm down at the I think it was the Bowery Hotel," which, as it turns out, that's a place where a lot of celebs hang out, So Todd was in the lobby of that bar. It's a lobby bar area. "Okay, I'm coming by," and he texts me back to give me a heads up. I said, "I'll be by in 10 minutes." he texts me back. He goes, Chris Rock is at the table. I'm going, oh my God. You know, now I know that Todd and Chris Rock know each other from the Comedy Cellar, and Todd's a very respected and well-known comic in New York, and I'm thinking, man, unbelievable. And I'm glad he gave me the heads up. So I get there. Now this was a week after the incident with Will Smith at the Oscars, and I walk in, and the lobby of that bar on this particular Monday night was packed, and I see. Now I'm thinking, well, maybe it's a table of 8 people that Todd's at, and I'll find him. And Chris Rock happens to be at the table. There's 2 people sitting at a table. It's Todd and Chris Rock. And then I walk over, and he introduces me. I had met him briefly many, many years ago. He would have never remembered that. But and you can feel every table looking at you, because he was still, that story was still huge, center of the universe. And I a few minutes in, I go, geez, I'm nervous. I don't know what to. But I finally said, I go, man, you had quite a week, huh? Because, yeah, and like, he's a very nice guy. Anyway, we hung out and talked about life and comedy and gigs, where he's working, what he's working on, when his next special is. And you're in a rhythm of just comics hanging out, talking about bits, I remember that night we talked about Brian Regan. We're all 3 big Brian Regan fans, but Chris Rock just goes, man, he's amazing. There's Chris Rock, and I know Brian. Brian's one of the all-time greats in my book. Not just current among my peer group, my generation of comics. I put him up there as one of the all-time greats. So we're just talking shop mostly about gigs, and so where do you work? He's asking me, well, I work a lot at the comic strip. He goes, man, I started there. We get talking about the comic strip, and that brings back nice memories for him. And at the end, the tab comes after an hour. I think we hung out for an hour. And I said, he goes, I got this. I go, oh, man, thanks. I mean, I knew he was going to get the tab. You kind of figure. I said, well, that's very nice of you to get the tab. He goes, if I ever get to the point where I can't pick up the tab, I'm in big trouble. He said something like that. I said, well, thank you very much. And he said, no, thank you. He said, you know what I needed after all this hell that I've been through, however he worded it. He goes, I needed a night out, just hanging out with some fellow comics. He goes, this was great. And then, off we went. And it's funny to do some more name dropping that particular night. And then as soon as he stood up and we were standing up, a bunch of people came over and shook his hand and said, you handled that so well. You were great, But there was a guy, the actor Liev Schreiber, that guy. What was the big show he was at? He's done a lot. Donovan.
Yeah, he's the voice of Donovan. He's the voice of Hard Knocks on HBO.
Is he? Okay, yeah.
Character in the Wolverine series.
Yeah.
Lots of
and
stuff.
Then he was there, and then as we were leaving, a guy at another big table stood up, and I'm like, oh man, look at that. It was Tobey Maguire, and he talked to Chris Rock for a few minutes. And I remember leaving that night. Fame is an odd thing. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, but I was leaving right in front of Chris Rock out onto the sidewalk, and there was a guy coming in. I go, this guy has no idea who he's about to see. And I could see the guy goes, hey, wow, And if you're famous, you must have to deal with that all the time. Just people going, yeah. I've tried to do a bit about that because I saw in New York one time, I saw Harrison Ford walking down the street, coming toward me. It was when I first moved to New York. Nobody else on the sidewalk. I'm walking northbound. He's walking southbound on First Avenue. And these were old style cell phones. And he's playing with his cell phone and he couldn't get it then. And he looked frustrated. And he looks up and he sees me, and he sees that it now registered with me that I know who he is, and he almost telepathically looked at me as if to say, yes, it is, and don't even think about it. Like, yes, I'm Harrison Ford, and don't even think about interrupting me right now and ask, whatever. But it is that was a crazy night. So the coolest night recently that I had was Todd Berry had his 60th birthday party a while back, and he rented out a bar in the West Village, or in the East Village, Beauty Bar on 14th Street, and there were 50 to 80 comics there, and everybody knows each other, and that place was just humming. Chris Rock was there, Jim Gaffigan, Dave Hill. God, so many people. That was a fun night, just bouncing around, talking to comics. I had a nice talk with Joe Zimmerman. Do you know him at all? He is great. Joe Zimmerman. He opens for Brian Regan a lot, and great comic, and so many others. Just hanging out. Dan Natterman, had a great talk with him. He's another really funny guy. And so yeah, it's pretty cool. And we can there is a shorthand when you get talking to fellow comics, because it is you go through the same battles. Tough crowds, hecklers, bombing. There's no feeling quite like bombing. It's so tough. But every comic bombs. So it's humiliating, and it happens. But there is a camaraderie there. You can be like humble about it to your fellow comics, and you can admit, yeah, man, I bombed. It was horrible. And then they know exactly what you're going through. They know how you feel about that, and they've done it many times as well. So you commiserate.
I'm wondering, when you have these sorts of conversations with comics, or maybe just in the way that you think about it, do you think at this point, or at any point, there's sort of an importance about comedy? I mean, you're in the system, you are a
Yeah.
comic, but do you ever sort of zoom out and go, is there maybe a purpose to it? Do you even have that in mind when you're doing that sort of thing, a sort of importance for, I think this is a good thing to have out there?
I've gone up and down and all over the place through the years. There was a time a few years ago where I said this on a podcast. It was on David Feldman's podcast. And I said, sometimes it hits me like, really? This is what you decided to do with your life? Kind of somewhat of an egotistical pursuit. I want attention on me, because I think you as a kid, you notice, well, I get laughs. I have a knack for getting laughs. And then you try to get laughs, and then you get inspired by seeing people on TV doing that, and you go, wow, maybe I could do that someday. But there have been times up and down over the years where I go, man, comedy's the best. And you hear from enough people over the years where they will come up to you after a show and they will tell you, I really needed that tonight. And I've heard enough people say that over the years to where you go, there is a purpose to this. Laughter, especially in a group, and there's no greater feeling in the world. When you're getting big laughs, it's great. But when you see somebody in the middle of one of your bits, and they're not just laughing, they're howling, they're doubled over, and you have connected up in their head. You made a connection that is powerful. And I can remember there were a couple bits during when I saw Carlin live. I was so thrilled to be seeing him live in Vegas, but he had me belly laughing. And I go, that is an amazing feeling. Because I don't belly laugh as much as I used to because I've seen so much comedy over the years that, yeah, you become a little bit desensitized. But the feeling of belly laughing and really laughing hard, it's very uh, cleansing, I guess. I mean, so you have to, yeah, maybe it was an egotistical pursuit, but it matters. And obviously it matters because it's still going strong. It's comedy's still booming. And, so people love it. So I guess it's a cool thing.
Yeah. So maybe is there a way to think about it where the sort of importance of it when it's going well doesn't really affect like the word choice and your delivery and that sort of thing. But when you zoom out and go, okay, what's the impact? What's the effect that at that level you can say, okay, this is maybe like a driver to keep me going because of the feedback and that sort of thing. And the reason I put it that way is because I'm sure that you have seen some comedians over the years sort of try and work um, maybe a self-important edge. I don't really know the right words to describe it that actually sacrifices some of the laughs. And I hear comedians all
Yeah.
the time just go, look, it's the laughs that we're trying to get here. You know,
Yeah.
the sort of other messages, they might be great for other contexts, but
Right.
here we're in the business of producing laughs.
Yeah.
And it does help people. But again, that might be sort of like a byproduct of what you're doing when you zoom out a bit.
Yeah. You have people like Bill Hicks, who was very good at social commentary, George Carlin, obviously, others that are really good at social commentary. And those comics were going for the laughs. They happen to be Chris Rock's social commentary. Chappelle does social commentary, but they're going for laughs too. Seinfeld, Brian Regan, they're not saying, in a sense, they're doing social commentary because the comment is, isn't life weird? I mean, my friend Gary Gulman, who I occasionally open for, and he's amazing. He does social commentary, but he also does great observational bits about the hierarchy of cookies, or that's a classic. He's tremendous, and and Todd Barry. Todd Barry's not necessarily doing commentary, but he's making you realize, wow, life is kind of strange, and that's kind of cool to point out that life is weird, and in a sense, it's weird, but we're all in this thing together, whatever this thing is. That's important. So like Stephen Wright's a perfect example of Mitch Hedberg. I mean, those guys, they shake your brain up and make you realize what an odd existence this is, and it's funny. It's a funny existence, and it's pretty cool that they can do that.
I think that's great. Yeah, exactly. And it, again, that relates to what we talked about before, which is you're looking at the world, noticing how sort of crazy and weird it is, and pointing that out to other people. I heard in an interview setting, Colin Quinn, who you and I both got to see
Yeah, that's
at the
right.
Comedy Cellar together. That was just thank you
He's
again
great.
for doing
One of the
that. One of
best.
the highlights of the
Yeah,
past year, at least. But he said something like comedy has an anger to it. And what I think he meant was that there's sort of this maybe edge that underlies at least a lot of comedy. I'm wondering if
yeah,
is that the right interpretation, or
yeah.
how
I,
would you
I, I
interpret what he
think
said?
so. I think it's Carlin obviously has an anger underbelly to his comedy, but I think he might have put it this way. He's a frustrated idealist or a disappointed idealist. I think even like I have a lot of rage in me. And I do a few bits that are, in a sense, anger based, but nothing like what those guys are doing. But it almost in every comedy bit, there is like, well, why is it this way? What? It's a complaint. It's all complaining, really, about, I don't know, I mean, something's off here. Or why is it so bizarre, this world we're living in? So I don't know. I mean, because I've heard comics say that about Brian Regan, that you know, he has more rage in him than you would first realize, because his whole bit about people who talk too much at no, the whole bit is it must be fun to have been one of the people who walked on the moon, because they go to a dinner party and they could just hang back eating their food. And somebody's talking about, I have a hedge fund out in, so and I'm not. And he talks about how people become me monsters, just talking about themselves. I'd love to be that guy. Oh, yeah? What do you do for a thing? Well, I have a hedge fund. What do you do? I walked on the moon. He just kaboom. And it's a whole long bit that I didn't do it justice, but you get the idea. There's a little bit of an annoyance with fellow human beings there, of self-centered people who dominate a conversation at a gathering and only talk about themselves, you know, kind of like this podcast setting with me talking about, you know what I mean? But that's the nature of a podcast. But um, uh, yeah, there is. I've found comics to be an idealistic bunch and a cynical bunch. Definitely cynical, and and uh, and I guess part of what gets you into this is you're you have a decent observation muscle, and things jump out at you, and you're attuned maybe to things that are not quite right, but I can't figure out why. You know, like I'm doing a bit right now. It's really starting to work, and this happened at a party. I went to a woman, and this is about as edgy as I get. Um, Party. A woman comes over. It was her second day in New York. She's from Indiana, and she comes over to a group of us, and she's just looking to she wanted to be in a provocative conversation, and she wanted some controversy. She comes walking over to us. She goes, "Hey, how you guys doing? I like New York, but where are your gun ranges?" That's that day two. What I do, and I thought of this later, but I tell it as though I said it on the spot. I go, "This is your second day in New York. There are more things to do per block in Manhattan than almost anywhere else in the world. And you're worried about our lack of gun ranges? Well, we were going to put one at the corner of 82nd Street and 5th Avenue, but instead we decided to build the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you know." And that gets the first night I tried that on stage. That story happened a bunch of years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And it kind of sat in my notes. And I tried it one night at the comic strip in front of a small crowd. And I remember the bartender and one of the waitresses had come in to watch. Tiny crowd. The crowd laughed, but I remember the bartender. He really laughed at that line. And I thought, all right, that's a keeper. And I've now expanded that bit. But there was an annoyance because she had an ulterior motive. Her mission with that with that conversation was to showcase her um, her certainty about her position on the Second Amendment. Because at one point, this is the second part of the bit that I do that I end with, and I'm still trying to expand it. She actually said this. She goes, "Well," very dismissively, "I guess you've never read the Constitution." She said that. And in the joke, in the bit, I now go, ugh, it made me so mad because I've never read the Constitution, and and that gets a good laugh because now the joke's on me and all that. But so there was an annoyance with a person who was just looking to, this is a nice gathering. Can't I just enjoy my Coors Light, my cheese and crackers, and you got to turn it into, oh, let's get into a political argument so I can win an argument. She knows that as soon as you bring up guns, it's going to be an argument. And even if you back away, what she kept doing was coming back to it, insulting. I guess you've never read the Constitution. Okay, got it. So it was a minor annoyance. She turned out to be a very nice woman. We ended up getting along. That's her way of having fun, I guess. Whatever. And but I do remember coming home from that party and jotting down in my notes, woman at party, quote, "Where are your gun ranges?" That's how it started. Just sat there in the notes for a little while. So that started with an undercurrent of annoyance, little bit of people. I mean, we're all tough to deal with in our own odd ways.
Yeah, exactly. I love that she didn't know it, but she was going to be a bit.
I hope, and I know who she is, and I know we have a mutual friend, and she might hear it someday because it'll be on the next CD, and I might even send it to her. And I do remember this, that, and you see me on Twitter. I'm a different personality on Twitter. I get political on Twitter. I don't get political anywhere else. But I know she was rattling on about guns, guns, guns on Twitter because we followed each other on Twitter. She told her husband, he won't last 2 weeks with me. He'll block me within 2 weeks. So she's talking about guns, and I came at a different perspective on guns. Or it was after some mass shooting. I think I posted something about whatever it was. She unfollowed me. So she ended up doing to me what she thought I was going to do to her. Unfollow for a differing of opinion, So it was a funny episode.
To draw it to a close, what is next for you? I know that you are continually doing stand-up. What are your plans? Where can people see you?
Yeah,
Where's the best way for people to see you and follow what you do?
It's funny. I just got a text today, right before this podcast, from a friend in California who's going to help me finally rebuild my website, tomryan.com. It's not up yet because it's, you just run into so many technical problems with all these things. It's amazing. But he's going to help me build it. That's my next thing. My career has slowed down significantly in the last few years. I just don't get as much work as I used to. And I was, kind of relying on royalties from Sirius Radio for a while there. That's a whole long story. That's significantly diminished. But I need to get them a new CD. So my next plan over the next couple months is to record a new CD and new footage at the comic strip They have a nice 3-camera shoot system now. That's on the Upper East Side in New York. I occasionally open for Gary Gulman out on the road. Um, but that's the main thing. I want to get new material out and into the airwaves and try to, you know, try to get working a lot again, and it's through the years. It's been an up and down, up and down, up and down process. The work comes and goes. I've been full time for 36 years. But this is the first year where I think I'm going to officially look at the numbers at the end of the year and go, ooh, that was my first part-time year as a comic. That's where I'm at now. That's just the nature of the beast. So I should have TomRyan.com up and running soon. I have a short version that I want to just get up for a placeholder. Then I have bigger plans for a larger website that tells all the stories of, you mentioned earlier, I've opened for a lot of people. That rock promoter who owned the comedy club, after a while, I had a half hour of clean material that I knew this guy knew worked in front of enough broad range of audiences. So he used to put me on as an opening act. And I got to open for all kinds of acts. REO Speedwagon, B.B. King, Aretha Franklin, John Prine, Jeff Beck, and on and on and on. So that was, I want to do a whole section of my website talking about all those experiences, and list all the people that I got to open for, which is a thrill of a lifetime. I had about a 10-year run of doing those kind of gigs. They were thrilled beyond belief. So, and then talk about, all the comics I've worked with over the years, like Brian Regan, many, many times opening for Brian, many, many times opening for Bill Hicks, John Panette, many, many times. People like that I'm honored to have opened for, even got to open for Dave Chappelle one weekend down at the Comedy Corner in West Palm. And in people, Bill Hicks is before your time, I think, but he's a legend, and you would know of him. When Dave Chappelle was about 19 years old and starting to rise, he was starting to get a lot of chatter in New York about. I was living in Florida at the time, but I opened for Bill Hicks at Caroline's Comedy Club for a week. And on this, it was either the Friday show or the Saturday show. Between shows, this guy who was in the audience comes over to me, and I knew who he was. And it's Dave Chappelle. He comes over to me and goes, "Hey, man, how you doing?" He goes, "That was great. Really funny." He goes, "Hey, do you think it'd be possible if I got to meet Bill Hicks? I want to hear about his UFO story." So I turned to my manager. I said, "Hey, Colleen, can Dave," and she was also a fan of Dave, who was just getting started, just starting to get buzz around him. "Colleen, can Dave meet Bill?" And absolutely, come on in. I wish I had had a camera with me that night. That would have been a picture for the ages, But I didn't introduce Dave Chappelle to Bill Hicks, but I facilitated the entry into the green room so that he could meet Bill Hicks. So that was pretty cool. Things like that. Yeah, that's the kind of anecdotes I want to tell on my website, and then eventually collect all those and maybe put out a book someday about all that. That's kind of what I'm thinking right now. But the next phase is to get this new 45 minutes in the can, audio and video. That's where that's my mission right now.
Personally, I can't wait for that to happen. I'll be
Yeah,
following you. I'll take
cool.
a look at the website. I can't wait to hear the new material.
Yeah.
Tom Ryan, thank you so
Jared, that
much.
great interview, man. Loved it. Loved it. You're good. Keep going with this podcast, and I think it's going to keep going. You have a great, unique angle on what to talk about. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. I just want to express, so much gratitude. I mentioned it before, but you didn't have to even communicate with this young kid who
Ah,
was
it
interested in your
was
comedy, but you did
I,
years ago.
that's nice. I always tell people, I say I have about 8 fans, and I'm related to about 4 of them. So you're one of the other 4 in that group of fan people that I could say, hey, they're actual fans of mine, which is, it's an honor. It means a lot. Believe me, I remember that. Somebody contacting you on the internet. I saw you on Letterman. That's thrilling to hear that. So
I
it's cool.
I appreciate it. Well, keep
Absolutely.
it all up. Obviously,
You
I'm
too,
huge
Jared.
huge fan, just like you said.
It's
And
great.
thanks for your generosity, your time, and everything.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jared.